Hi, this is Julian Collins from Julian Creates. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know how you can design and win your very own Bernina Dream Studio. Just check out BerninaSweepstakes.com. When I designed mine, I had to make sure I had a personal island that I can use all the space on for my creations. See it for yourself and get in today to win Bernina's Dream Studio 100K giveaway at BerninaSweepstakes.com. Dream it, design it, win it.
Welcome to So and So, brought to you by Bernina, made to create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with a special member of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Our guest today is Tula Pink, an illustrator, fabric designer, quilter, author, maker, and an eponymous brand. Tula graduated from Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles and worked briefly as an exhibit designer for museums in Southern California, where she grew up. When this vocation became too quiet, she joined the music industry as an art director, designing album covers for numerous notable artists. After about 5 years of that, she left her job and California, landing in the Midwest. Tula's main function in life is fabric design, which she says she lives for. Her signature designs have been adapted to fabrics, woven ribbons, paper products, needlepoint kits, embroidery patterns, and sewing machines, and can be found in independent fabric shops and retailers all over the world. Tula is most recognized in her industries for her dark sense of humor, a flair for hiding animals in the strangest of places, and she says this is artistically, not literally, and her boldly unique use of color and pattern. Tula comes from the more is more school of design, where there is never enough space and always room for that one last thing. Today, Tula works with Free Spirit Fabrics to develop multiple fabric collections. She's an ambassador for Bernina, develops collections, and writes books about quilting and sewing. She now lives in a small town outside of Kansas City, Missouri, in a house that used to be a barn and still sort of looks like one. Hi, Tula, and welcome to So and So.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great. We've been looking forward to this and have a lot to talk about today. And I want to jump right in that you come from a family with no quilting history and you're self-taught. Why did you choose sewing and how did you teach yourself?
Well, I'd like to point out that this is pre-YouTube when I started
Mm,
sewing. So
mm-hmm. Good point.
yeah, so it's a lot more difficult. It was a lot more difficult to self self teach back then. I feel like now it's so much easier. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend who taught themselves how to swim by watching videos on YouTube recently. So I feel like you can learn a lot more a lot easier these days. But I mean, you know, I feel like it was a great stroke of luck that I found quilting. Um, I I don't come from a family, like you said, that quilts. So I didn't have that in my family. I didn't have sort of like generational knowledge to pull from. But I was crafty always as a kid. My mom said I was born drawing. So,
Mm-hmm.
art, crafts, making things, that was a huge part of my life always. And my parents, I was really lucky that my parents were super encouraging of that. And when I was 12, my grandma gave me a sewing machine for Christmas, just like a little, you know, big box store cheap sewing machine for Christmas, just not because I had any interest in sewing, but because she wanted to see what I would do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just loved anything, any tool that was for making, and a sewing machine was a tool I didn't have. So, uh, it was kind of a stroke of luck, and we went looking for fabric, and the first fabric shop, like, I didn't know there were types of fabric or types of fabric stores, and the first one we came across just happened to be a quilt shop, and I was struck immediately.
That was it right there.
That was it. I saw quilts, and I saw, it was interesting because back then there wasn't, I mean, we're talking like, you know, early 1990s, which is a shockingly long time ago when you really think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, And there wasn't like this like modern wave of quilting and fabric hadn't really hit yet in the way it has now. And so I was looking at these very, very traditional sort of Civil War reproductions, 30s feed sat quilts. And I don't know, I saw more in it. Like I saw a place for me in that, even though it didn't seem obvious at the time.
Hmm.
And and I wanted to do it. It's all I wanted to do. It's weird that I never really had an interest in making clothes or all the other things that most younger people are brought to sewing to do. I loved quilts immediately, and that has never changed.
Now, you were talking about seeing some of the traditional quilt squares and designs. From that, what drew you to fabric design?
Well, I'm an illustrator by nature, so that's probably like my core function, talent, whatever. I draw pictures. Uh, that's what I do all the time. It's what I've always done. And, drawing for fabric is a really, really different proposition. And I think what brought me to fabric design specifically was that I couldn't find the fabrics I wanted.
Hmm.
So, as a an artist and a maker and a designer sort of by nature, when you can't find something you want, you make it yourself. So, that's what I did. That's literally how I started designing fabric. It was me searching for the fabric I wanted but couldn't find, so I was just going to make it myself. And my original plan, and this is also pre-digital printing, so, and I'm really glad that I came up like before all this technology, because I probably would have just digitally printed the fabric myself and never tried to embark on this as a career, because all I was
Hmm.
really trying to do was serve my own craft. I wasn't, I had a job. I worked in the music industry. I was successful. I wasn't looking for a career. I had one. So, and one that I had studied for and worked for, and,
Hmm.
and so I was really just looking to serve my own craft. And had I had the tools to just do that, I might have only ever done that and never tried to make it a career. But at the time, I needed someone to produce this fabric for me so I could use it.
Hmm.
So going to a manufacturer and, showing them my portfolio and trying to get them to print my fabric was really self-serving. It wasn't in the pursuit of a career. It was just to get me the fabric in my hand so that I can make my quilts out of it.
Sure.
Um, and, and once I was in it, it was like all of my previous training sort of came into play. As an exhibit designer in museums, I knew how to put a booth together and create a display and show off the artwork and the product. And as working in the record industry, I knew about marketing, I knew about launching, I knew about, and it was like, oh gosh, have I been working my entire life to serve this and not
Sure.
realized it? And that's kind of what ended up happening.
And that awareness got you to where you are now.
Yeah, for sure.
Tula is somebody who was born drawing, and so you've got this in your DNA. You've said that you live for fabric design. Do you talk about this a little bit, and do you see designs in around you in everyday life?
It's funny. I feel like the question that most people ask is, where do you get your inspiration? Which is not what you're asking, but that's a question I get asked a lot, which I think is like a weird, unanswerable question. But
Hmm.
I don't look around me and see things that I want to put in fabric. I I am like, I live most of my life in my head. I spend a lot of time by myself
Hmm.
and I'm a pretty reclusive person, and I enjoy my time to myself, and I spend a lot of time making things up. And that's kind of what comes out of my fabric. So I would say my influence is less external and more internal. I mean, I'm trying to draw the world I wish I lived in instead of settling for the one I see. Um
Interesting. Hmm.
it's really, I mean, what I draw in my fabric is sort of, it's a fantasy. It's aspirational for me. It's what I wish. I saw when I opened my eyes and looked around.
Now, I want to take that a step farther. We talked in the intro about your dark sense of humor and that you hide animals.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Well, when I started designing that very first fabric collection, it was called Full Moon Forest. So it was the first collection I launched as a fabric designer, and the first collection I designed. And 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 I started out drawing what I thought fabric was supposed to be. Like I looked around and I was like, okay, here's collections that exist. They have a paisley, a polka dot, a stripe, a focal print, a medium set, like all the functional pieces that a fabric does, like a fabric collection required in order to complete a quilt. And so I did that. I did a paisley, I did a stripe, and then I was like, I'm bored already, because
Sure.
it's like this is just I'm just doing what I've seen, and that's not my way. So I was looking at the paisley and I was like, oh, if I take this line and move it here and take this line and move it here, I can make this paisley into an owl, right? Like I can make it
Mm-hmm.
look like an owl but made of paisleys. And I can take the stripe and make it a forest of vertical birch trees. And I can take the polka dot and make it raindrops. So I can like tell a story through all these little prints, and they are those prints. They are the things because quilts require certain things. They require loud moments and quiet moments and large scale focal pieces and support pieces. Like a collection is very strategic. A fabric collection is. It's not just whimsy. Like there's certain things a quilt requires, and and so I started doing that when I turned that first collection in with all these hidden animals in, I took a vine and made it into a squirrel and so it's like the animals were there, but they weren't always super obvious. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. Sometimes you had to really look for them. It was sort of like a search and seek kind of
Mm-hmm.
game.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it interesting to me. Like I love the idea that at first glance it's one thing, but the closer and closer and closer you get, you see different things at different distances. And that was interesting to me. I was no longer bored. And when I turned that first collection in and signed my first fabric contract, they said, well, that you'll have to do this forever. Like this is your thing. And I was like, what, drawing animals in traditional patterns? Yeah, I can do that forever. Like that's not a
Mm-hmm.
hardship. And so that just became my thing. And it's a little bit surrealist, it's a little bit strange, but at first glance, it's actually pretty comfortable, because I'm working with really traditional patterns usually. My favorite fabric designer is William Morris, and I've studied that's how I taught myself how to design fabric by studying his sketches and his partial design sketches where you can see the real structure of everything. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I taught myself how to make repeats and all of that. So I really love this. Like everything I do is really rooted and based in this very like traditional and antique textile approach. Um, and then and then I just make it weird because I think that's more interesting.
Well, let's talk about your style a little bit more. It has been described as modernitional, which is part modern, part traditional.
Yeah,
And I know you get a kick out of this. So
I
so
do.
describe this for us.
Well, it's really funny because I mean, I think it's fairly obvious that I'm not a modern designer. I think we've, as an industry, been trying to define that term for some time, and I'm not real interested in the definition of that term, but I consider myself an incredibly traditional designer. And and I've always said that if you take a photo of my quilts in black and white, they're very, very deeply traditional.
Hmm.
It's the color that makes it not feel traditional. Like the collection I just launched actually this last week, is all neutral foundations with neon prints, neon ink.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, but if you take that neon out of it and you take the kind of wacky color out of it, I mean it's really not terribly modern at all. And my quilts are very much traditional. Like I love like antique traditional quilts, and that's what I make. I just make them in rainbow with neon colors and crazy colors. But I consider myself a very traditional designer, but I'm sort of categorized in this sort of transitional. It's clearly not traditional because of the color, but that's really the only thing that takes it there.
So I get the sense that when people interact with your fabrics, they really can experience a myriad of different things as they spend time with them.
100%. I mean, and that's what I want, you know? I think people have, I mean, I believe that your intention, like the passion I put into a thing can be felt by people.
Hmm.
Not in like a super mystical way. I think that when people interact with my fabric, I feel like they feel how much I love it. Like it shows, like the care and the attention shows, or on some level people are picking that up. And so people have a real emotional connection to my fabric.
So there's much more to it than just the piece of fabric.
I think so.
Tula, you are known internationally and you've built a large community around your brand and your creations. How do they influence what you do?
Like the community at large has a
Hmm.
huge amount of impact in what I do because I really see my job as serving them. It's an interesting sort of position to be at, trained as an artist and a designer. You're trained to sort of there's this romantic idea about following your own whims.
Hmm.
And I don't really believe in that. I'm not making a painting that sits framed on a wall exactly the way I intended it to be. I'm creating a fabric that other people are going to use to execute their creative vision.
Hmm.
So I'm not in control of the final product. I'm essentially collaborating with my community so that they can reach their creative potential. So I'm not the final piece. I'm really just the paint that they're using
Hmm.
themselves. I'm a tool for them to express their visions. So it's a really different sort of approach. And so if I'm collaborating with them in the greater sense of collaboration, uh, I really work for them. And so I listen to them and what they want.
What's it like for you when somebody shares their creation or their vision with you with some of the paint that you've supplied them?
It's amazing. It's so fascinating because I work on these fabric collections for months and months and months and months, up to 18 months it takes to produce a fabric collection and get it into people's hands. And I always think, and I've been doing this for, 15, 16 years now, and I always think I've thought of every possible way that it will be used,
Hmm.
and I never have. And so somebody will show me something they've made, and so often I go home and, like, really think about how they used it in a way I hadn't thought of and try to figure out like, sometimes I'm so into what they've made that I go home and I make it myself
Mm.
using their combinations. So, like, there's a lot of influence back and forth. I love to see the way people use it, um, the combinations that people put together, the way they especially, when they intermix fabric collections of mine. It's always so interesting to see what they pull from their stash of previous collections and True Colors, which is my sort of like ongoing collection that's always available. That's a support to my main collections. And
Hmm.
seeing the way people pull from that and what they use and what they gravitate towards is always so interesting because it's often very different than the way I saw it. So it's enlightening, is I think often what I feel when I see something because I'm like, okay, I designed this. I've seen it in every possible what I thought configuration, and you've now discovered something in my own work that I didn't see. And that's always it's just the coolest. Like that's the moment that I love the most.
Now, you've mentioned that you're not opposed to the commercialization of art and you believe in its democratization.
Yeah.
Tell us where these beliefs started and how do they affect what you do?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, like my training is as a designer, so my degrees are in graphic design and illustration and not in fine art. And I find that fine art is like there's a lot of gatekeeping, and it's a hard thing to break into. It's one of those things where like, only one person can have that one Picasso. Like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Only one person can have it. Only one person can hang it and enjoy it, or they can donate it to a museum where you can go visit it. But I love the idea of creating artwork that many, many people can have, that many, many people can enjoy and have different relationships with it and use it differently. And they get to put their stamp on it. I think there's something really magical about that. And um, I'm really, really into that whole like that it's not just for one person, right? So it's like it's not just for a certain group of people, it's not just for one person, it's for a lot of people to have a lot of different relationships with the same piece of artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something really magical about that.
I get the sense, Tula, in our conversations that your creations are not so much about the thing that you create, but the ensuing effect that it has on people who experience it.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. Um it's only about the interaction that people have with it for me.
Hmm.
Because without that it doesn't matter. It's like
Sure.
if I created things that only I was into, then that's nothing. That's just self-satisfactory. There's nothing in that for me. It's all about the interaction I have with other people and the interaction they have with the work. um that's a that's all of it, really.
So I want to kind of change gears here a little bit and talk about, we talked earlier about, what influences you, what inspires you. And Um, you are a history buff, and you love to read all you can about famous women in history, such as Marie Antoinette, Queen Elizabeth, etc.
Yeah.
And these women have inspired some of your most well known fabric lines, which I think is fascinating. So, talk to us about this inspiration and give us an example of what was inspired by this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say history buff is a generous statement.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm really fascinated by historically stories about women that have endured, because there wasn't a lot of place in history for women, especially ones that leave a lasting impression. So, I mean, I think one of my first fabric collections that really explored that was about Elizabeth the First, Queen Elizabeth the First,
Mm-hmm.
and I had just come back from England, and I was, it's interesting. You growing up in America where history is so new. We're a really young country. And so, we don't walk down the street and see things that were built 1,500 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
at best, maybe 250 years ago. Like, if you're like on the East Coast, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I grew up in California where like literally nothing was older than 22. And if it was, it had already been plastered over or had surgery of some kind. So,
True.
so, it's interesting to me, with historical documents being mostly written by men,
Mm-hmm.
for a woman to endure all these revisions of history throughout years and still be known today. I mean, I say Queen Elizabeth I, and everybody knows exactly who I'm talking about. They might even picture her in some way, which is crazy
Mm-hmm.
because she ruled in the 15 and 1600s. So like that's insane that we still know who this is as in like the public consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
What how much she must have had to accomplish in order to endure this long, right?
True.
And I just think that's really interesting. I think the idea of like who we remember and why we remember them is really interesting. Some for scandal, some for greatness, some for a myriad of different reasons. But there are people that we remember and their stories are still fascinating to us today.
Hmm.
I mean, they still make movies about some of these women today, which I think is really, really interesting. Movies that people watch,
Hmm.
that people want to watch. It's like we're still sort of trying to understand these women hundreds of years later, and it's like, huh, that's interesting to me.
So, what would your biography say about you? What would people remember you for?
Um, I don't. My first instinct is to say I don't know that people remember me at all because I very rarely leave my house, so I don't know that anyone knows me. But
You
um,
are known. You are.
it's like the only person that's probably like capable of writing anything about me or my life would probably be my brother. He's probably the only person who actually knows me,
Hmm.
because he works with me and he's helped me build this and everything, so he's been here for it. But I always feel like everything important about me is actually in the fabric.
Hmm.
Like anything I feel or think or, a lot of like my personality traits, I think if you're looking at it closely enough, if you were so inclined to do so, would all be there, would all be present. I hope that people say that was imaginative, I suppose.
Hmm.
That would be the defining quality.
So you're writing your autobiography every time you create.
I mean, I look at it that way.
Sure.
And obviously there's a lot of context left out that people wouldn't know unless they know me, but I feel like there there is an autobiographical nature to what I do for sure.
Now, you mentioned your brother,
Yes.
and Tula Pink is a family business. He works with you.
Yes.
Take us inside the day to day. Tell us who does what it's like for you to run this business.
Yeah.
Give us kind of an inside peek at this.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, I mean, this industry specifically is interesting in that way because I think you'll find that um an insane number of the businesses in this industry are family businesses at different levels. Obviously, Bernina is a family business.
Hmm.
Um, Free Spirit is owned by Jaftex, which is a father and his two sons. It's like there's a lot of family businesses. Like I would say, like 90% of the businesses in this industry are family businesses, which I think is super interesting.
Hmm.
I don't know of any other industry that's like sort of that deeply rooted in family. But yeah, I mean, I started out doing this on my own, and my brother Cameron, he's 10 years younger, 9 or 10 years younger than me, depends on the time of year. And he is basically my right hand. So he handles all of sort of the digital world of Tula Pink. So he is the online arm of Tula Pink, and he manages the social media and the websites and all of that stuff, so that I can do all the physical work,
Hmm.
the designing, the making, all of that, and then my mom, who doesn't actually work with me, but she runs an online store called, or she owns an online store called I Heart Tula Pink, and she just sells my products. So while we don't work together, her business is based off my business. So it's interesting. It's just it's an interesting family dynamic, and we did really have to learn how to work together professionally.
Hmm.
There's certain things that like a sister would say to a brother that a coworker can't say to another coworker. So there was a learning curve. Like the first couple of years, I think we probably bickered a lot more, like brother and sister do, and
Hmm.
and all of that. And we've been working together for I think like 11 years now, 11 or 12 years now.
Hmm.
And I don't think if you would have talked to either of us as like teenagers that we would have anticipated this being our life, both of us working in the quilting industry as coworkers and partners in a business living in the Midwest. When we were teenagers in Southern California, I don't think if you would have told us that, we would have laughed and said that's ridiculous. Um, but like all of it would have been seemed ridiculous living in the Midwest, working in quilting,
Sure.
being, running a business together, like all of that would have seemed insane. But um yeah, it's been really cool because through learning how to be respectful coworkers, we have, I think our relationship overall has just become incredibly solid.
Mm-hmm.
We trust each other. And I think that's the biggest thing. Trust and respect is sort of the foundation of everything we do. And even though we respect each other and trust each other as brother and sister, this is like a whole different level.
Mm-hmm.
And this added level has really brought our family a lot closer together, which it started out making us not as close, but we've become closer.
You
You
worked
know,
through it.
we worked through it, and I think it's made us better overall. So it's a really interesting dynamic. It's like, because Cameron knows every single thing about my business,
Mm-hmm.
and my business is like the most crucial part of my life. So to have somebody that involved, you have to have a lot of trust and a lot of respect, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, and we just start from that place with everything. And I think it's been really cool because our whole family is like supportive. I mean, my whole family basically quilts now, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's kind of always excited, which is really cool.
And you mentioned not only knowing your business, but that your brother knows you best
Yes,
as
I would
well.
say he probably knows me better than anybody.
Now, in talking about family businesses, you mentioned Bernina,
Mhm.
and you are an ambassador for Bernina.
Yeah.
Would you tell our listeners what that means? What you do?
It basically just means that I really love Bernina. But no, it's really interesting. So, like I had mentioned earlier, my grandma gave me like a cheap, probably like an $80 sewing machine when I was 12. And I sewed on that for years,
Hmm.
like 10, 15 years. And when I got to a point where I didn't really know that there was a difference in sewing machines at that point. When you're starting, you're just figuring out, you don't know anything. And when I decided it was time to like buy myself a good sewing machine, like this is where I was at in my life. I wanted to have like a really good sewing machine. It was my joy. It's the thing that took me, like, settled me down after a long day of work, when I was working in the music industry and all of that. And so I started asking all of the like best sewists that I knew, quilters, just people who sewed, what they used.
Hmm.
And it was almost completely unanimously Bernina. So I was like, okay, well, then that's what I have to get, right? Because that's what everybody uses. And so I bought my first Bernina, and it was a lot more expensive than my first machine. And it didn't take me more than about a half an hour to figure out why. It was like a wildly different experience, like wildly different. And I was just smitten. So I heard that they had an ambassadorship program where they worked with people who sewed, and I thought, I want to learn everything about sewing machines and how to use them. Like, I didn't know anything really. Like, I was sewing with very little practical knowledge. I was just working things out as I went. Like, I didn't know there were like different types of needles. I mean, I did, but I didn't think it mattered. And so, so I was like, I wanted to become an ambassador because I knew there was a lot of education that came along with that. So as an ambassador for Bernina, um, you learn a lot about the sewing machines, and basically anything you want to know, they'll teach you. And so that was my initial, and I've been an ambassador with them for, gosh, well over a decade, well over a decade at this point.
Hmm.
And when they come out with a new product, I can go up to the Bernina headquarters outside of Chicago, and I can try it out. I can learn it. It puts me in connection with my local dealerships. I can try things with them. I can, if I have questions, I can get them answered. But really, the reason I'm still a Bernina ambassador is just because of my extreme love of Bernina. I mean, I am a Bernina girl to the core.
Hmm.
I have 14 Berninas now. Yeah. 13 or 14.
That was the next question. How many do you
Um,
have?
I
Sure.
keep like two or three of them out all the time that I sew on, but
Uh huh.
I've also designed three machines for Bernina. So obviously I have those, and then I have backups of those
Hmm.
just in case I need them for some reason. I'm not sure, but So yeah, so I have a lot of Berninas for sure.
So you were talking about designing a machine, and I want to talk about an interesting fact here. Earlier in an earlier episode, I interviewed Kay Fassett, who has just designed a machine for Bernina, and he credited you with being the spark that led to his relationship with Bernina. So, would you tell us about how you two met and how he inspires you?
Yeah, that is incredibly flattering. Yeah, I mean, I am very good friends with Kafe and Brandon, and um, I think that's very nice that he said that. And I credit him with actually bringing me to fabric design. So, I mean, really, Kafe, before I knew him, sort of changed the course of my life. I so the first time I ever saw his work in a store, I was just in my local fabric shop. It was a beautiful little store in Carpinteria, California, and it was a really like forward thinking store, and so I went there a lot, and they brought in things that I had never seen anywhere else, and so I loved going there because it was just a treasure trove of things I'd never seen before. They carried a lot of Japanese fabrics and just like more wild stuff. It was a very unconventional fabric store. I believe it's some version of it is still there. Roxy's is maybe what it is now. Um, but I walked in and they had a huge display of a new fabric designer called Kay Fawcett right in the middle of the store. And it was the first time I ever looked at fabric and thought, this came from the mind of a single person. Like, this isn't a reproduction.
Mm.
This isn't something old made new. This isn't like a group of people designing a collection or whatever, which is mostly what I had seen. This was so clearly from the artistic mind of a single vision, right? And it was the first time I ever
Hmm.
actually thought about the fact that a person designs fabric, because the industry was like, I want to say like
Mm.
90% reproductions. And if it wasn't a reproduction, it was usually novelty of some kind, a baby line with teddy bears. If it was clearly a new illustration, it was usually a novelty illustration of some kind. And this wasn't that. This was
Hmm.
florals and leaves and foliage and geometric patterns that were just wild. The colors were insane. It was like everything was on fire in the best way, right?
Hmm.
And and I was like, wait, somebody's designing this. Like, a person did this. This is not designed by committee. Um this is a unique vision, and that was sort of my first sort of like light bulb moment that somebody is out there designing fabric for a living and I could do that too. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like Cave is a total anomaly in every way. There's no one else like him. I don't believe there will ever be anyone else like him. He's just so deeply committed to his vision. And I think that's so fascinating. He's been doing this for so long and he's never gotten off course. He's just so uniquely him. And I think that's the mark of a great designer.
How did you two meet?
We actually met when I started designing for Free Spirit. So when I originally started designing fabric, I pitched my line to Free Spirit because they had Kafe and Amy Butler at the time, who were basically like my fabric design heroes. And those two really changed the game in a lot of ways. And I pitched to Moda Fabrics. And I ended up going with Moda because I was a little bit too afraid. Well, they're a great company, but also because they didn't have anything like me. And so I thought, oh, I'll be a little bit more individual on this side. And I was honestly, to be like perfectly honest, I was a little afraid to stand shoulder to shoulder with Kafe and Amy and call myself an equal, I was very intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point, I realized that Free Spirit was really the better place for me to be just for my work.
Mm-hmm.
My work would fit in better with their customer. And so I switched over and went to Free Spirit. And that's when I really got to know Kafe. And because now we were colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would see each other at markets and stuff and got to talking and just, I mean, the rest is kind of history.
Tula, what's next for you? What's your dream?
My dream, honestly, is just to be able to do this as long as possible. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we've had so many questions about will you ever go into wallpaper and rugs and all these other things, and it's like I'm just not passionate about those things. Um, I keep like a running list of all of the quilts I'm gonna make when I retire, and I don't have to sell the patterns for them because
Uh-huh.
you really make very differently when other people have to be able to make it also, you know? You can't be
Mm-hmm.
quite as whimsical about it. You can't have 300 fabrics. Well, you can, but it'll, make people pretty upset. But, um, it's I don't know. I mean, I try not to think too far ahead. I try to just like serve the needs of myself and my customer and quilters and the business in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I try not to get too bogged down with thinking past or future. Try to stay in the present as much as possible. And I think that's part of what's made me successful.
So we've talked about a lot of things today.
Hmm.
And my last question to you is there a question that I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Um, no. I mean, preferably I'd like to not be asked any questions at all, but um
Because you're in your head and you're an introvert.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean I am deeply introverted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think people really totally realize that about me though. Um
Mm-hmm.
because I talk pretty easily and that's usually not the sign of an introvert, but I have a good game face.
Mm-hmm. You know, there's a word, and I don't know what it is for someone who is really an introvert but can be an extrovert as needed.
I can do it as needed and for short durations.
Uh-huh.
I have about a 90-minute limit before I need to retreat and then I can come back.
Well, you've been wonderful with us today and very forthcoming, and I just want to tell you it's been a terrific conversation, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Tula, if any of our listeners would like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Um, Definitely through social media, Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, probably the best way.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Another story about someone just like you, someone for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life. It's a connection to something bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or just complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, review, and rate this podcast on your favorite platform, and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.